Next, I'd like to talk about a common mistake often seen in games played by kyu-level and beginner players. Playing moves that strengthen the opponent and eliminate potential invasions. The first example is a game between my students, both around 2Q OGS. My student was playing white, and I had to scold him for this game. What happened? First, I'll show you what was played, and then I'll explain his mistake. White played this endgame move. Black responded. Then white attacked and captured this stone. Usually I recommend to capture such stones, but when there's no Aji left anyway, it's perfectly fine to leave the shape as is. Let the stone remain in Atari. If it's not going anywhere and won't help black, leaving it uncaptured is actually better for points. But in the game, white captures the stone. So what happened next? White played endgame. White cut the shape like that. This fight was bad for white. The problem was twofold. First, because of this nasty Atari, and white's shape got much worse. And second, look how rock solid black's left side became in the process. Black has clearly become stronger, so what was the mistake? You should only play endgame moves when the endgame actually begins, especially if those moves are not mutual sente. We can see that it's highly unlikely black would have time to play that descent for at least the next 100 moves.
And if Go inspired you, check out Go Magic. It's both a website and a mobile app with courses for every level, from beginner basics to advanced strategies, plus tons of interactive problems to sharpen your skills. The perfect place to grow as a Go player.
So if white wants to play this endgame move, it can always be done much later. So here's the main piece of advice. Regardless of your plan to invade now or invade later, or maybe even play elsewhere, you really want to hold off on these moves until the endgame. This is a classic example of what the Japanese call Aji-Keshi. The bottom line is, don't play such moves early. Don't play moves like this in the opening. Had the fight started without this exchange, if white had simply cut the shape, white would have had a much easier time invading on the left, because black's shape would have been much weaker. In the actual game, white ended up losing. They got themselves into a really nasty fight because they strengthened their opponent first, and then picked a fight in that same area they had just made solid. Second example, a game between players around 10Q. Also my students. White was building a moyo, and so was black. Here we see an excellent boundary move. And what does black do? Instead of invading, they decide to just secure their own area. So let's see what happened here. And this is the part I had to talk to my student about. Black made this exchange first. And then this jump. Looks logical enough, right? That's a solid territory, but what's the hidden drawback? Moves like this one are another classic example of Aji-Keshi. Just like in the first example, they destroy your own invasion points. If we don't make this exchange, if black protects the area, say with this move, what Aji is left in white shape? It may not be useful immediately, but later black might want to attack and destroy this area somehow. Without that exchange, black could invade directly. Or black could create a group inside with a move like this. Struggle a bit inside, then maybe make an extension, and because that bad exchange wasn't played, black has an attachment and save their weak group. Black still has a way to connect. But once you play it, that connection is gone, and invading becomes much harder. In other words, black gained maybe a couple of extra points, but in exchange they made white much stronger and made a future invasion much more difficult. If white's position gets solid, that invading group might even die. Therefore, here's the advice. Avoid playing such moves when you don't immediately need them. Don't strengthen your opponent. It was another example of Aji-Keshi. Now let's look at a real tournament game between 3 Dawn players. Imagine you're playing white here. Look at black's territory on the right. If you wanted to attack this area, what move would you consider first? So here's what happened in the game. White played far too passively and let black keep all this territory, which is why white ended up losing. In the game, white made this exchange, and black was happy to defend. Then white pushed here, and black was happy to defend again. After a jump from white, and a response from black, white just settled for the simple endgame move. The result? Black got to keep all their points. So what was the alternative? In positions like this one, you always look for an attachment first. Maybe from this side, or over from this one, or perhaps a direct invasion right here, to create some aji in the position. You could start with an attachment as a yosumiru, which is a probing move, to see if black will let you connect. If they do, great. Problem solved, the territory is ruined. If they block, you can then follow up with another attachment, a jump, or something along those lines. But if you realize you're behind, a much better approach is to invade. Even if white dies, even if white loses the game, this is still better than peacefully playing the endgame and losing by 15 points anyway. And now for a final example of Aji-Keshi that wipes out your potential. We have a game between two 9-dam pros from many years ago. Playing black? Well, you can probably guess from the black's position alone. It's Takemiya Masaki and his Cosmic Go, and his opponent playing white is Xiaochun, a Chinese pro, known for his extremely territorial style. At the time, he was one of the very top players in the world. True to his territorial style, Xiaochun decided not to invade this area. Instead, white just played a jump for a modest reduction. Then, to stop black from getting an attachment here, which would leave some weaknesses in white's corner, white played some sente moves. And then quickly played another sente here as well to take away that possibility. Finally, black's position became rock solid and Xiaochun as white ended up losing the game. What was the problem? Where did it go wrong? If you analyze this game with Katago, the AI really doesn't like white's play in this game. Even though everything seems standard, a common shape on the right, a common shape on the left, but the thing is, if you're behind on points, you have to be more aggressive, and not destroy your own aji. What white did here, especially with these moves, is another classic example of Aji-Keshi. Sure, you might argue that these are just endgame moves, but the key is that moves like this should only be played when the endgame actually begins. If we're still in the middle game, white might need to invade later on. So what did white lose? The potential to make this cut. It's true, it doesn't work right now, because the latter favors black, but later in the game things could be different, and that cut could become a huge threat. Also, a sente move like this could have become useful, and an attachment might have been important. In response to a black move, white could have chosen to cut or jump to initiate a fight. Or if black played Atari, white might have even been able to start a co-fight here. By playing these endgame moves way too early, white made their opponent solid. So now whatever white plays in this area, black has absolutely no more worries about the bottom side. They know it's perfectly safe. Therefore, before playing such moves, you have to check if they are sente for both players. If it's sente for black, then of course you'd want to play it as soon as possible. But in this position, that Atari is gote for black. White doesn't have to answer. And that means white can always play this move later. So first, play out the big moves in the center and look for a chance to invade. Only once black starts playing moves here and that invasion window closes, then and only then it is time to play these endgame moves. This is a very common mistake, and even top professionals sometimes play these moves too early. You're almost always better off leaving them for later. Perhaps even this attachment. And these other moves could be kept in your back pocket for later, and you could plan some kind of a deep invasion instead. In other words, if white wants to attack this area, there's an invasion point here and also one here. If you realize you're short on points, it's much better to think about a deep invasion than to just play simple endgame moves. By the way, you can also watch these lessons on our platform, gomagic.org. Except there, you'll watch them with interactive quizzes right within the lessons and practical exercises right after them. And if you enjoy watching these Go videos and you don't want to miss others like this one, go smash that like button, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and this is Go Magic.